Hi, this is Omi Dashtari.
And Natasha McElhone.
In this episode, we talk to Erling Kagge, who is an explorer, author, publisher, and art collector, and the first person to have completed the 3 Poles Challenge on foot, the North Pole, the South Pole, and the summit of Mount Everest. He has written 8 books on exploration, philosophy, and art collecting. They have been published in 42 languages. His new book is The North Pole, The History of an Obsession, which is out later this year.
In this episode, we talk about searching for infinity in the North Pole.
The hardship of exploration.
And how inconvenience is actually good for you.
Wearing the same clothes for 50 days.
Confronting polar bears.
Pooping at minus 50.
How a single raisin can make your day.
Living underground in sewers.
And whether silence can be measured. But before we dive into all of this, I'm going to share an extract from Walking, one of Erling's already published books. Homo sapiens have always walked. Since the time they first made their way from East Africa over 70,000 years ago, our species' history has been defined by bipedalism. Walking on 2 legs laid the foundation for everything we have become today. Our kind crossed over Arabia, continued on foot up towards the Himalayas, spread eastward throughout Asia, across the frozen Bering Strait, through the Americas, or south towards Australia. Others walked west to Europe, and finally, all the way up to Norway. These first peoples were able to travel long distances on foot, to hunt in new ways over larger areas, and to gain new experiences, and learn from them. Their brains developed more rapidly than those of any other living creatures. First, we learned to walk, then we learned to make fire and to prepare food, and then we developed language. Human languages reflect the idea that life is one single long walk. In Sanskrit, one of the world's oldest languages originating from India, the past tense is designated as the word gata, that which we have walked, and the future is anagata, that which we have not yet walked. The word gata is related linguistically to the Norwegian word gat, meaning walked. In Sanskrit, the present is indicated by something as natural as that which is directly in front of us. Pratyutpana. I have no idea how many walks I've been on. I've been on short walks, I've been on long walks, I've walked from villages and to cities, I've walked through the day and through the night, from lovers and to friends. I've walked in deep forests and over big mountains, across snow-covered plains and through urban jungles. I've walked bored and euphoric, and I've tried to walk away from problems. I've walked in pain and in happiness, but no matter where and why, I have walked and walked. I have walked to the ends of the world, literally. All my walks have been different, but looking back, I see one common denominator: inner silence. Walking and silence belong together. Silence is as abstract as walking is concrete. Until now, I've tried the obvious explanation, the one you turn to because it's quick and easy, and the opposite of the essence of walking, which is slowness. I explain that he who walks lives longer. The memory sharpens, the blood pressure falls, your immune system gets stronger. But each time I said it, I knew it was only half the truth. To walk is something much larger than a list of advantages you can read in an ad for vitamins. So what is the other half of this truth? Why do we walk? Why do we walk from, and what is our destination? We all have our answers. Even if you and I walk next to each other, we can experience the walk differently. After having put my shoes on and let my thoughts wander, I'm sure of one thing: to put one foot in front of the other is one of the most important things we do. Let us walk.
Hello, this is Omi Dashtari.
And I'm Natasha McElhone. And with us today we have the wonderful
Erling Kagge.
Thanks so much for being here, Erling.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. And today we're going to talk about exploration and many other things. But I wanted to anchor us by talking maybe a little bit about the fact that the well-trodden cliche idea that we are all born explorers as children because we navigate the world to figure out how to kind of get around. But at some point, many of us give up and we land in a rut. So you kept going and you stayed an explorer. I'd love to hear about how you managed to stay curious and get out there.
Yeah, as you said, I think it's important to keep in mind that we're all born explorers. When you see a kid, as soon as you learn how to walk, you want to figure out what's between yourself and the horizon, and you walk towards the horizon and eventually beyond the horizon. This spirit is decreasing, but it never goes away, I think. It never goes to zero. So although, you get a feeling that quite a few people have lost the spirit of exploration, they haven't, but it has been diluted for sure. And that's kind of the easiest thing in life, I think, to give up a lot of this spirit, which again I think is a mistake, because at least to me, life is very much about exploration in the sense of making life more difficult than it has to be. I think that's very much the meaning of life, and this is not my idea. I mean, Plato wrote about the same, that the meaning of life is to fulfill your own potentials. And I think every wisdom that has lasted for more than 1,000 years, you should take seriously.
I like that.
I think, to a certain extent, happiness can really only be felt when you're going from some kind of misery into the opposite. If you're kind of in the opposite shape all the time, if you live a fairly good life, I think the quality of your happiness, is going to be quite low.
Have you ever met Sylvia Earle?
I have actually.
Have you? Tell me.
What a beautiful human being and a very fascinating explorer. I don't know her, but I've met her a few times. Of course, kind of the first times I met her, I got a bit starstruck because I had read so much about her.
She holds the record.
Many diving records.
Yes, many diving. And she still does. She's 88.
Free diving or?
Not free diving, maybe free, but mostly
381
scientific.
meters or something.
Yeah. I can't remember records, but kind of, her achievements as a scientist, but also as someone who's talking about the oceans, showing photos from her expeditions, and really influencing people's kind of relationship to nature.
And exposing the damage
Exactly.
done to the coral reefs. And I think also she was voted Hero of the Earth.
That's pretty cool title. But what I really was found of the first time I met her was her warmth.
Yeah.
This kind of curiosity, respect for everyone around her, although of course she was a superstar. So I think that, also says quite a bit about her personality, being just a deeply sympathetic person.
I heard her interviewed once as well, a long time ago. I can't even remember where it was now. But I got this sense that she had a calling, that it was this inexorable pull towards something that nothing could really get in the way of. And when I read your books and when I read about your preparation and your dreamscape and hinterland, where you imagined what the North Pole might look like or what the South Pole might look like, it seems similar. Many of us can read books about it when we're kids, or we can look at copies of Nat Geo, but it's someone else's life. You had the, confidence to think, no, actually, that's going to be my life.
I think if you have a lot of confidence, quite often you won't succeed in much, I think. I think people I know who has been successful in exploration or in literature or in arts or in business, whatever, they have this kind of strange combination of inner insecurity, but also strong confidence. But you're always kind of doubting yourself and doubting what you're doing and questioning yourself. But at the same time, you have this kind of confidence that, I'm going to try, I'm going to prepare as well as possible, I'm going to just not give up on the way. I also think it's kind of a calling. It's a deeper thing. It's like,
that's I suppose what I mean. It doesn't feel like it's a thought process or an idea. It sits somewhere else. It's just something that is inevitable and is going to happen, and you're going to do it in your life, and she was going to do it in her life.
The term obsession was used earlier. I think that is probably the right.
You need to be obsessed, and I think that's kind of, is underrated. I think being obsessed is something, like, for many people, something negative, but to me it's mostly very positive.
So forget equilibrium.
Yeah, I heard that business students at NYU, New York University, they was asked about their priorities in life, and they all wanted to be top 1% earners. They want to live in the most beautiful homes. And they wanted balance in their lives. And kind of, you can have it all, but you can't have it at the same time.
Yeah, I like that. You already started going down the route, so why don't we actually get into your explorations? I'd love to talk about the North Pole. Tell us a little bit about your attempt with
Børge Avsland.
Børge, yeah. Tell us about the details. I think it was 50, how many days? 55, 58?
58 days.
58 days.
And nights, yeah.
And nights, yeah. So I think there's a new book that's going to come out about it as well.
Yeah, I'm just about now finishing a book that will be called The North Pole.
Yeah.
I think its subtitle will be something like Nature, Myth-Making and Melting Ice. I'm not sure.
Lovely.
But that's definitely the themes of the book. Something, deeply fascinating by the North Pole because, of course, it's on the top of the world, but it is an ocean, the fifth biggest ocean in the world, covered by ice, and it has been ice for 2.7 million years, for around 75,000 generations, and we may be the first generation that will, see the polar ocean with no ice, at least for a short period, like in the summer. So that's one of the reasons I sat down to write the book. And also, of course, because Børge and I had walked there. So I'm writing from a different perspective than others. It is a really difficult place to get to, which which was a sweet spot for Børge and me.
Yeah, we managed to get the foreword from your book, and I remember one of the things that you said there's like, there were no thermometers around, but there was one in the plane, and as you were landing, you're looking at it, it was minus 50 degrees or something that. How does one even survive in minus 50? I can't even imagine it, to be honest.
It's strange. You kind of get used to it. But of course, when it's minus 52 degrees, and we couldn't heat the tent because we had very limited fuel, you're freezing, you almost start crying sometimes because it is so cold. And you get exhausted because you ski all day. And at the beginning, it was kind of dark in the mornings and in the evenings. But what's interesting is that you get used to it. You eat the same food every day. It doesn't taste that good when you start, but after a few days and weeks, it's starting to taste better and better. And it's dried meat, it's fat, it's oat, it's some chocolate, it's some bacon, it's some dried milk, it's some raisins. And eventually it's the best food you ever tasted. And, that's a great experience because we live lives, at least for me who lives in Oslo, super privileged lives and kind of hardly any worries when it comes to material matters. But it's interesting to see how short time it takes before you actually used to live a really primitive life with very primitive means.
I think it was in another expedition, and it was your solo expedition, but there's this beautiful passage in your book around peeling off a segment of tangerine, just one segment that you were allowed that day.
Yeah,
exactly. And, one day too, I was so hungry, and I lost a few raisins into the snow, into the ice towards the North Pole. And let's say it was about minus 40 degrees. I was cold, and I saw those 3 or 4 raisins laying on the snow or the /ice. And I just went down on my knees and just licked it up with my tongue. And the taste was beautiful.
I'm sure.
But of course, at home, I would just, I wouldn't bother. But, it's this kind of memories is something no one can take away from you.
There's a beautiful quote, despite how much you've traveled, and as everyone probably knows who's familiar with your writing, that you've traveled at least 100 different countries and they've all surprised you. But you said, I've only experienced one place that is unlike anywhere else, the North Pole. Because when I finally got there, I realized there was no there.
Exactly. And that's, that although I knew, I as an opposite to the great explorers from the 19th century and the early 20th century, when they went northwards, they didn't know anything about what was going to meet them. I kind of knew, but still it was surprising when you eventually get to the North Pole. It's nothing there. It's just drifting ice, maybe an open lead. And when you're at the North Pole one day, next day you have been drifting 10 or 20 kilometers away. So it's nothing there.
But why did you think there was going to be something there? I mean, isn't that in our imaginations as kids when we think about even Santa Claus or any of the sort of mythology around the North Pole? It feels like it's round and endless and infinite. What were you expecting to find?
I didn't expect to find anything particular because I kind of knew, but still was strange because exploration has traditionally been about taking something back home. Usually something valuable, like, people went on exploration to build wealth. Obviously, I didn't do it for that reason, but, even Scott and Amundsen brought some rocks back from the South Pole. While the North Pole, it's actually nothing. It's as it says in Winnie the Pooh, it's just a place you explore. It's nothing else. But I like that, but it felt strange, despite that I knew it in advance.
You're always operating at a calorie deficit, by the way, right?
Yeah.
You are throughout, mostly, because you must be burning a lot more than you can
so we
consume.
ate about 6,000 calories
you did? Okay, wow.
per day, but you burn off a couple of more thousands.
Yeah, wow.
I remember I saw my partner, Børge, when we got to the North Pole, we had the same underwear on for 58 days and nights. I didn't take it off once. And he lifted on his shirt and I saw was absolutely no fat left and also a lot of muscles had been burnt off. And I was just laughing and then I did the same on myself. And of course I was just as thin. So it's not healthy.
Yeah.
But, it's okay every now and then.
Just to get gruesome for a moment, and please be as transparent as you feel comfortable being. What happens when you haven't taken your clothes off for 58 days and then you do? What lurks beneath?
It's I like it. I enjoy it. I think we shower and wash ourselves too often. Although when I'm in Oslo and go to work, I take a shower in the morning just to be polite. But what's interesting towards the North Pole is there's no bacteria on the Arctic, on the polar ocean. So the only shit you have is the shit you bring with you. So you don't get sick, and it's super cold. So you don't smell the sweat either. So, and you have so many other worries towards the pole that you get a bit dirty is the least problem you have.
But how do you poo?
Yeah, how do you go to the bathroom?
You do it just like home. You take your pants down to your, down on your legs, and you go down in a hockey position, but just much, much faster.
Do you get frostburn or something?
If you like to have a detail, you can cut it after the podcast if you don't want it. It's the trick is you need to shave your arse before you leave, because then it's the hygiene is just use tiny bit of toilet paper and then you're finished. Because
But does your butt not freeze?
It freezes. Oh yeah. It's everything freezes. It's.
So do you
it's just hard to describe how cold it is to have a shit when it's minus 50 degrees.
That's what I mean. So do you stave it off? Did you get constipated for days on end and then just save it up for the fourth day?
No. You need to put everything into routines. And because there's so many decisions to make during one day, so you fix in advance how many hours I'm going to walk, and when are we going to have the breaks. Like you have a break after 2 hours, 10 minutes break, and then you start exactly after 10 minutes. So discipline is super important. And that also comes to pooing. So you poo same time every day, because then you only do it once. And it's very practical. And I live after the same regime still. So it just your body get accustomed to all these kind of routines.
Yeah, gotcha. And what goes through your mind while you're on this walk? Because I think that you probably require a lot of resources to just be the automaton that goes through the routine, right? But what is going through your mind as you're doing it?
It's a very simple life, which you can sometimes be missing in civilization. The most important is, of course, you have to get up at the right time every day, and then you eat breakfast. But at the same time, as you prepare and eat breakfast, you're doing something else at the same time. You always try to save time. And then you start to ski around the same time every day. And then, what the most important thing is to put one leg in front of the other and do it most as effective as possible. So sometimes you hardly think at all.
Yeah, it's a meditation.
Yeah. So you kind of almost like you self-hypnotize. Actually, later in life, I learned properly how to hypnotize myself and other people. And I had this friend, psychologist called Nick Bayliss, and he said to me, Erling, you should learn how to hypnotize yourself properly because you have been hypnotizing yourself throughout your whole life. And I did, and he was right. So you're kind of in a trance. You're not disturbed. It's like, you put one leg in front of the other. You try to navigate through the ice. You try to support your partner if he has any problems. And he supports you. When he's the weakest, you kind of try to help. And when you feel the weakest, he tries to help you. So it's kind of a beautiful life. And you go to sleep at the same time every evening. Sometimes it's too cold, so you kind of wake up at night. It's brutal. It's painful.
Would you share a sleeping bag, or is it?
Yeah, we shared sleeping bag for the first 30 nights. But then we had individual sleeping bags inside it. But of course, we didn't have anything in common but this ultimate dream about reaching the North Pole. But when you sleep in the same sleeping bag for that long, you either become very unfriendly or, great friends. So we're still great friends.
Nice.
Yeah.
In terms of the quest, I guess there's many levels. And I'm sure also it means different things to you at different times in your life. And you're ruminating now because you're revisiting the trip and writing this book. Something you talk about in quite a few of your books is not that you can control the passage of time, but somehow that there's something about walking or moving that slows things down. And that you quoted once, I don't know if it was you or it was a philosopher that you loved, moving your body at the same speed as your soul.
Yeah.
So not being in a plane or a car, but using your own legs so that a shared experience between mind, spirit, body, something like that. Yeah. And I was thinking, is there some desire in you to, and also you wrote a book called Silence, which I'm sure was informed by these expeditions. I think you said noise and everything else can be measured, but silence can't. There's this kind of existential quest for the infinite.
Yeah, exactly, kind of the timeless infinite. But to what you said about your soul and the time, the speed you're moving, I think it's a very important point that today people are moving so fast, so your soul, your mind is not able to travel at the same speed.
What I'm hearing is the less you do, the more time you have.
Yeah, but also the opposite somehow.
I feel a road trip of Route 101 in California down the coast, if it's with intention, can just be as rich as, I'd say, probably a walk or something. When people don't do things with intention, they just see the journey as a means to get to a destination rather than actually experiencing the journey. And every journey is to be experienced.
But there's also, and I know you've quoted her before, Emily Dickinson, who is famously agoraphobic and actually didn't really move from a room for a very, very long time in her life. I mean, 20, 30 years, her poetry is as if she's travelled the world because she said the width of the landscape of...
your mind or brain is wider than the sky.
That's right. Exactly.
Nice.
And it's the end of a poem. And of course, it's just a beautiful end of a poem. And I almost also fascinated. I mean, everybody should read both a little bit about her, but also, of course, her poetry.
But she's not the only one. There are lots of people who were locked in rooms hundreds of years ago, writing as if they'd travelled the world.
Absolutely. And, a philosopher like Immanuel Kant wrote about the whole world. And he never left Königsberg. And he hardly left his home, just once a day. But today, it's common to have this idea that you can explore yourself and the world by looking into a screen.
And the screen, yeah.
And I think that's a big mistake. So we're kind of the first generation who's actually not doing something physical when we're exploring. I remember when my kids were younger, we watched this movie called Wall-E. Remember the movie?
Yeah, it's beautiful.
So that's kind of 800 years into the future. But, it may be sooner than 800 years. Because,
I think
of
we
course,
have that. Partially, it's already there.
Yeah. And, we kind of, we think about humans as kind of defined as something once and forever. But, of course, Homo sapiens or humans, we're redefined kind of all the time.
Before we go to getting lost in screens and being quite disembodied, just to go back one stage, which is when we discovered locomotives and we started to make travel faster than our bodies could move. And there was more thinking space because our bodies weren't employed in the strain of getting somewhere or carrying things or having to camp or all the exploring that you've done. Something I get from your writing is the quiet mind. How do you get to that? Is actually by employing all of your other faculties so that your mind isn't free to talk to itself, to have that conversation that goes on and on and on and on that we're all very used to. We have endless meditation apps to try and find ways away from our minds. But
I think it's a state of flow. If you do that for 50 days, I think you were in a flow state in a way, in a continuous flow state. So I get that when I play music, or I get that when I dance, for instance. Sometimes when I'm on the dance floor, I just I feel one with the universe. And I think what you've done on these trips is like having that for 50 days, which I find fascinating, just like prolonging this flow state. Because in the flow state, you're not mediating your surroundings through language. You're just existing in it. You're there.
But
and you're taking it all in.
How sustainable is that? How generous is that? How helpful to others is that?
You tell me, I think.
Just keep in mind that, this state you're talking about is something everyone can have.
Agree.
Because it's easy when we talk about it to think that, this is kind of for explorers or blah, blah, blah.
No.
But it's for everyone. So, and then again, most people, I think, are underestimating their own possibilities in life and also the possibilities to experience what you just said. This is something just kind of waiting for us, waiting for everyone to experience, almost everyone. But what value it has, and you mentioned, Natasha, the word generous or generosity. I think that's one of the most beautiful words. What I have been doing is certainly very egocentric. And I didn't walk to the North Pole or climb Everest or South Pole, whatever, for any other reason than myself. But then when I returned back home, especially from the South Pole, I understood that it had meant a lot to other people, which was a really great surprise. Because, of course, that also made it much more meaningful for me afterwards, having spent years to prepare. And when I came aware that actually these kind of expeditions could have a value for others than me, I also, start to use energy on it, to write about it, to talk about it, and inspire other people to not necessarily do the same as I'm doing, but follow their own path and find their own North Poles. So then eventually it had some generosity and some meaning for others. But, many explorers say they climb Everest because of the view, or they walk to the North Pole because they want to be nice to children, whatever. Of course, you do whatever you do for more than one reason only. And this can be one reason, but, it's not the main reason.
Can I take us to the South Pole because you're mentioning it? At first, it may be North Pole flora, fauna, nothing? Do you see anything?
Now you see, you can see a polar bear, maybe a seal that pops up an open lead, maybe a polar fox.
Okay.
That's it.
That must be so exciting.
When you see nothing for the whole time and then all of a sudden.
Tell us, did you see a polar bear?
We saw a polar bear.
Far away?
20 meters away, where my partner Berge saw it, and he shouted, "Hoi!" And I never heard him shout "Hoi!" before. So I looked up and saw the bear, and this was close to the North Pole, and we knew, this far north is kind of nothing to eat but expedition members.
Yeah, I was just about to say.
So we were quite certain it was going to attack. So we grabbed our handguns, really quickly. And the bear walked a little bit back and forth, and Berge, he had this huge dream about having his photos published in National Geographic magazine, which was a huge thing in the old days. So he dropped his gun, grabbed his camera, didn't have a film in the camera. This was, when you need a film. put a film into the camera and got me to stand between himself and the bear, posing with a gun, like, come on, Teddy, make my day.
And all this in
just within seconds.
-50.
Yeah, exactly. This was later in the trip, so maybe it's -20 or 30.
Oh, yes.
But all this happened super quick, and then the bear turned towards us, started to dig his forefeet, lower its head, and we knew she was going to charge. And a bear can run up to 60 kilometers an hour, so maybe this ran in 40 kilometers an hour. So it's, from 20 meters until it's, where you are, it's a very short time. But we still had to wait until it was really close up because we had only handguns. And to save weight, we had short barrels, just 2 inches barrels. And if you're going to hit it in the chest, which you have to not only kill the bear, but also to stop the bear in its stopping power. So we had to wait until it was really close, and then we both fired. That was a close, it was like, who's going to have who for dinner.
Yeah. Wow.
And how did that feel?
Before we shot, you stay, at least, we stayed absolutely cool and rational. Of course, a little bit stupid taking a photo, but still, we kind of had control. And when you shoot, you're totally cool. But afterwards, it's kind of 2 reactions. It's all the stress appears. You understand you have been super scared, so you're shaking a little bit. And then also, it wasn't, but it felt unnecessary to have to kill a polar bear because we were in the polar bear's territory.
Its environment.
Yeah. And we were relieved and sad about the same thing.
Did you eat it?
Yeah. So this was going to be with no support. Sir Ranald Fiennes, he was trying to do the same at the same time. This British explorer, great guy. And he said, you should not eat, if you shoot any animals, you shouldn't eat it. It will be kind of support. So we didn't eat any polar bear meat before we got to the pole.
I see. Okay, gotcha. Yeah. But you took some meat.
Yeah, we took some steaks, and Børge had learned how to get the best fillets out of a sheep in the army.
That's what I was going to ask you. Did you use the fur?
Yeah, no, we didn't use the fur because it's too heavy.
Yeah.
And but he insisted he got the best steak out of the polar bear, but it didn't taste like it. So so it's
Wow. Okay. Now back to the South Pole. Flora and fauna, maybe because we're on the topic. I assume it's very different, or
it's the biggest difference between the Arctic and the Antarctic is that the Arctic is, as I said, is an ocean circumnavigated by continents. While the Antarctic is a continent circumnavigated by oceans. So you actually walk on ice, but the ice is mostly resting on the continent. So it's, in that sense, it's much less complicated to get to the South Pole. But it's on the coastline you have great wildlife, but inland you don't see anything. At least I didn't see. I saw nothing for 50 days and nights, and I didn't have a telephone or any way to communicate, two-way communication with the world. So I was absolutely by myself.
Wow.
And tell us the difference in the experience between the solo voyage and the dual one with your friend.
I think the biggest difference is that when you're alone by yourself in nature, the experience of nature gets much stronger. It gets really silent, both around you and in your mind. So I think as a personal experience to kind of expand your mind, apropos Emily Dickinson's poem, that was certainly what happened. And that expedition, a great lesson on the importance of silence, and silence is very much about getting to know yourself. Could be uncomfortable, and that's why people mostly prefer noise, because noise is about other people, it's about other stuff than yourself. And when I think about noise, of course, it's sounds, but also, man-made lights, etc., etc. All this is noise. We prefer noise because that's the easiest thing in life to relate to, while silence, as I had to experience towards the South Pole because there was no other option, was deeply meaningful. It wasn't easy all the time, but it really had to face myself.
And something that you've spoken about is how we avoid the present. So we either live in the future or the past. And I can't remember which of your books because I've read a few now, so they've become one canon. The experience of being on your own in the South Pole was the time when you've most inhabited the present.
It's a really beautiful feeling, which is, of course, difficult, a little bit difficult in civilization. but is to be present in your own life and not live in the future, as I said, not live in the past, not living through other people, not expecting too much going to happen, but just being present in the moment, being present in your own life. That experience, of course, got much, much stronger because it lasted for such a long time. But again, I think you can have the same experience, maybe less strong, almost anywhere. You just need to, put your act together. So I think, you can find an inner silence. This inner silence is there all the time, waiting for you to experience it. I think you can sit down at Piccadilly Circus and you can still find an inner silence. Maybe it's a little bit more difficult, or it will be, but you can still find it.
Or maybe it's not. Maybe it's easier to hop in and out of it than have a sustained experience like you. Why do you think living in the present is painful?
I think, silence can certainly be painful. Not necessarily very painful, but a little bit painful to start with. We're born in a way that we're always thinking about the future or the past. And if you're going to be present, you somehow have to disappear from those two desires. And I think, as you said, you get into a kind of a flow or kind of trance or something less complicated. And suddenly you feel like you're part of eternity. And you, as I mentioned earlier, you become timeless. Again, I think it's something everyone can experience. But you have to put yourself in a position to be able to experience it.
I really like what you're saying, and I do think you say this quite often as well in some of our pods, is we've clearly lost something as we build civilization, right? From, say, our nomadic past, because when you have less of that around you, the distraction, the other people, the civilization, and the focus on culture rather than nature, you certainly have bandwidth for other things. The appreciation of very little, it comes very much through in how you describe it.
When I got to the South Pole, the Americans have built a base at the South Pole. They didn't expect me because I didn't communicate with the outside world. So I just kind of walking and they saw me from the base. A few Yankees came, to greet me. And the first guy said, "How do you do?" So I said, "Like a pig in shit." and again, Natasha, I hadn't washed for those 50 days. But then they offered me to stay inside the base, and I stick to my tent.
Oh wow! Okay.
I believe I did that every night because I needed to adjust, and it took a few weeks actually to adjust. But what was surprising maybe is that after a few days towards the South Pole, you stop missing anything. I hardly missed anything during those 50 days and nights. It was kind of a Norwegian dream: ski all day, eat well in the evening, and sleep at night.
How
you miss skin contact, that's something you're missing, but beyond that, hardly anything.
Okay, and how does this feel when you come back? Do you see how you're falling back into the trap of missing or wanting things?
Yeah, because the week after you come back, your washing machine breaks down and you need to call a plumber and you need to pay him and life goes on. But having said that, it's, as I said in poem by Tennyson, we are a part of all that we have met. And that's certainly true. So that experience, never goes away. I mean, it gets weaker, but that's also the reason I could sit down and write a whole book about silence was because I had done that expedition. It's also because I had 3 teenage daughters. Afterwards, and then my life was all about noise. They didn't know what silence was. With that experience and many other experiences and the expeditions, I could say something about silence people hadn't read before.
Yeah, I actually think that sound pollution has a very visceral impact on our neurophysiology.
Yeah,
and I noticed this myself. I remember I was in New York for 2 weeks, and I came back on a red eye to Notting Hill, and I got out of the tube, and for the first time I heard birds, and it was silent. And it was an epiphany where I realized, oh, wow, I was constantly stressed while I was in New York for those 2 weeks, actually. And I didn't realize, but I realized how my body just calmed down when I heard the birds. And, it was just very quiet.
New York is a very noisy city. But also I love New York.
Of course.
New York is about making money.
Yeah.
And making money makes a lot of noise. Yeah.
I like that. Let's go to the subterranean expedition that you had. You explored, as we are in New York right now, and on topic, the sewers and the tunnels under New York, which is, I think, the subway tunnels, right?
Yeah.
This is a complete contrast to what you've done before. Maybe you want to talk to us a little bit about how it was different and how it was similar.
Yeah, I had this friend who told me he was a psychiatrist and went underground in New York to find mentally ill people on the Sundays, his day off. And I got deeply fascinated by that people actually living underground. I was kind of, looking into different possibilities, and eventually I saw the possibility of crossing the whole city, alpine style, with a backpack, a sleeping bag, a little mattress, and starting up north in 242nd Street, which is in Bronx. Walk through the sewage of Harlem, or Bronx, sorry, down to Harlem, and then crisscrossing the city all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. So, and I suggest the idea for this urban explorer called Steve Duncan, great guy. This was his life, to get in and out of manholes and climbing bridges. But he, neither anyone else, had ever kind of done it alpine style to kind of cross the whole city. Their idea was to climb a bridge, do something at night, and then go to sleep. But I wanted kind of as an expedition. So we did, and others were joining and leaving, but Steve and I, we did the whole expedition, 5 days, sleeping underground. And, what you see is what New York will look if you turn it upside down. Also, you see so many things, but also everything that happens above ground is somehow reflected below ground. Everything, if you build a building, you see it underground. And of course, whatever people consume partly is also ending up underground. So it was very interesting, but also kind of humorous, because we tried to cross the sewage in Soho, and it was that tunnel and the Green Street going down to Canal Street is so narrow. So we had to crawl through the shit. And then we just started laughing because it's just too wild.
You don't say. So I mean, this is the opposite of the
shitting quickly.
Yeah. And it's all noise all the time.
With the white pure snow.
The antibacterial environment of the North Pole versus you just.
Yeah, we didn't get sick actually, but
wow.
it's for me. It was, first of all, it was just it was a funny trip. It was a mini expedition. It was something no one had done before. But also at the time, this was in 2010, I think it was. And the mother of my kids, we're not good friends anymore. So we both knew it was kind of falling apart, the whole thing. And I felt like shit. And I just wanted to somehow dig into the shit. And which I did. People say you can't walk away from your problems, but of course you can walk away from your problems. But
into bigger problems.
Into bigger problems. Yeah. But of course, when I returned back home, the problems were even bigger. But for a while, I just walked away from my problems. I got a major break from all the noise at home and just had a great time. And sometimes a little bit dangerous, but the biggest danger is to be seen by the police, because of course all this is illegal. And there's so much police in New York. So that was kind of our major concern.
I know you said in passing that people often say, without thinking, when you tell them about your expedition, I wish I could go to the North Pole. I wish I had the courage to go to the South Pole. I wish I could climb Everest. I did some of my live stream. And how many people have said, I wish I could walk through the sewers of New York?
Yeah, it's. I remember first time I heard it was we sailed across the Atlantic in 1984. We came to Barbados. I think almost the first person I met. We came sailing from Cape Verde in West Africa. The first person said, I've always been dreaming about doing the same as you have been doing. And that kind of, comment has followed me ever since. But I had kind of, full respect for it, because there's so many good excuses or explanations for not choosing the most difficult path, but also a little bit sad because, these people are 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years old, and maybe start to understand that they kind of missed out on at least this chance to have a really rich life.
Or maybe they're just relieved that now
also
time's
relieved.
passed and they don't have to do
it. Also maybe relieved, I agree. But it's, I can't remember this old rabbi who was saying, if not now, when? I think that's important. You should not postpone all these kind of things. You have to take action. And I think that's also some of the beauties being an explorer. At least my experience is but also as an entrepreneur. First, I got the idea, and then I decide to do it. And afterwards, I think about how it can be done. And, preparations, challenges, difficulties, etc. Because, it's if you first get the idea and then think about all the difficulties,
you never do anything.
You never do anything.
Yeah. I'd love to talk about the hardship part that you just described, because we had this conversation before the mics went on. It feels like we're in a time where a lot of people are trying to avoid hardship and friction. As a matter of fact, so much so that, they're trying to cancel other people when they say things that they don't like. Try to point fingers at other people just so that they don't have to change or they don't have to accept other things that people say. Now, I don't know if that's a very prevalent thing in society. Certainly, it seems like there's a lot of it around. How do we change people's minds in this regard? What is the richness that they're missing out on?
They're missing out on life, and they're just narrowing in their own visions, their own horizons, and somehow you're born with a 360 degrees horizon, and you're kind of taking this huge fight to just narrow in your horizon, and you've tried to avoid the fact that life is brutal. Johnny Cash was singing, "Life is hard and the world is rough. If a man got to make it, it got to be tough." Yeah, so I think they're missing out on the most important in life.
I know you've said in the past that you set out to make your life more difficult than it might otherwise be, presumably because there's a ratio between difficulty and interestingness for you. And are you saying that the less difficult people try to make their lives, in fact, the less interesting the outcome is likely to be?
Yeah, I think that's something I strongly believe, but obviously also because I wasn't born in Sudan, I was born in Norway. And somehow my personal philosophy, idea of a good life is that you wake up in the morning and you're making all the choices throughout the day, and you have to choose between the easiest option, a bit more difficult option, and the most difficult option to the different matters. And in my experience, you should, not all the time, but usually you should go for the most difficult options during the day. You should get up early in the day. You should make your life more challenging through almost every day. But of course, this is not a religion, so sometimes you can get pissed what you want and sleep all day. But it's in general in life, I think you should actively make it more difficult than it has to be.
But is that because as humans and as a species we've learned, cultivate things and make our life easier, employ machines and whatever we call civilization. So things have become too easy, so we start to self-sabotage in some way or try to find difficulties or mental blocks and landscapes where we find problems because actually we've stamped out all the threats from nature that we might otherwise be encountering. Because doesn't finding the path of least resistance, isn't that what the rest of nature does? It flows in the easiest way. So why wouldn't we, if we were in tune with nature, try to do the same?
You can compare yourself to a river, which necessarily find the easiest way through the terrain. But I think we should be more ambitious than that. And also, what is the easiest nature, etc. It's not that simple to answer either. But for humans, I think, the way we're born with all the talents we have and all the time we have on Earth as living beings, it is a little fight to make it meaningful. And in my experience, people are wasting their lives on doing almost meaningless things. And I don't think it's necessarily anything wrong with it, but it's to me it's a mistake, because you have this one huge possibility to live a great life, a rich life, a life with many highlights, and then you choose not to. And I think, this is, of course, it's about making life a little bit more difficult. It's about being more in touch with nature. It's about getting up in the morning. It's about, reading. It's about listening, of course. It's about participating. It's about generosity, was mentioned earlier on. It's about being generous. And it's certainly about trying to make the world a little bit better place to be. And, when I used to date different girls, if they thought that, it's impossible to change the world for the better, it was always a turn-off, because, of course, everyone can change the world for the better. And, the cliche is even a mouse can eat an elephant if it takes small portions.
I think that living life on hard mode, as what you're saying. That's what I usually call it. Even just living a principled life where you have values that you stick to, even if they are uncomfortable to represent in some situations, right, is in a way playing life on hard mode. I also find, for instance, today in the social media game, everybody is adopting the principle of being extreme because that's what the algorithms, put out there, right? And that's the easy way. That's the easy way. It's actually really hard to be exceptional because the exceptional stuff gets shared as well. Yeah. But it's really hard to be exceptional. It's super easy to be extreme. That's just what everybody does. So I think what you say resonates beyond just seeking out nature for me, but it actually has something to do with the value system and principle that you stick with because you believe it's worthy. And it creates friction, of course. But going back to what you said earlier as well, is like, it's about the differences when you're changing from a state when your arm is hurting for weeks and then all of a sudden your arm is great, to really recognize, oh wow, now I have my full range of motion again. I never recognized that this range of motion was so valuable to me until it was gone. So, depriving yourself of things on these journeys and then, going into these different states really kind of...
Not to do has many sides, but it's, just one example is that if you live your life on kind of more or less the same level every day, my experience is that then you will end up feeling life is very short. And in one way, you're correct, because life is short because you hardly experience anything interesting. And it's kind of hardly any changes. Everything plus minus is almost on the same level. And of course, then 1 year passed by, 10 years passed by, 50 years passed by, suddenly 70 years old, and you think that all these days and weeks and years that passed by, was that really my life?
Yeah.
But if you reconnect to nature, if you're interested in other people, if you read great books, see good movies, listen to music you don't understand but try to grasp it, your life gets more interesting and it feels longer. And also, it's just like if you go to Tokyo for 2 days, you feel you have been away for 2 weeks because it's so different. So, and in that sense, life is long.
But we shouldn't go to Tokyo for 2 days to bring you.
We should all go to Tokyo for 2 days.
No, we shouldn't, because coming back to climate change, for our last topic, talk to us about what you feel about that, what you're doing about it, your first experiences of the North Pole when perhaps that was less of a known threat, what was happening, and the melting, and where we are today.
I think all polar explorers going up north have had the same experience. It's getting warmer and it's getting less ice. That in itself is interesting, but of course it's still anecdotal. But when you look into the science, it's confirmed that it's not only getting warmer, but it's getting much warmer up north than it does in the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. They say it's about 2 or 3 times warmer. Now, it has heated up 2 or 3 times more in the Arctic than the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. And that is really dramatic because the Arctic traditionally has been covered by white ice and white snow. All the heat is reflected up into the air. But now, when it's partly open water, all the heat from the sun is getting into the water, remains there, heats up the water, and that again makes less ice, and the air is heating up. So the consequences for the rest of the world is not easy to grasp. I don't know, but it certainly will be traumatic. It will be dramatic. I was up there last time in September last year. And you kind of get the feeling that when I looked out onto the polar ocean and saw just water all the way towards the North Pole and hardly any ice, I just get the feeling that the ice doesn't need us, but we certainly need the ice.
And is that a first to see that amount of water in the last 2 million?
Yeah, I think it's years? The Arctic has been covered by ice more or less constantly for 2.7 million years. So, and then 3.5 million years, it was probably not much ice, still some ice. But what the consequences will be, impossible to say. It will be dramatic, for sure. But that's one of the reasons I want to write about the North Pole, because I think it's it's the whole history from prehistoric times until today is very much, all a story about the world, and it's about a story about where we came from and what's going on today, and not to mention what may happen in the future.
This was an exploration of all different parts of the top of the world to the bottom of the world, underneath New York. We went in various different directions. Thanks so much for being the tour guide, Erling.
Thank you for inviting.
I've had the Emily Dickinson experience of going to the North and the South Pole with you. Thank you.
Thanks so much.